so pleased to welcome you as we gather now with our gathering music.
Thank you, Beth, for our gathering music. Good morning. I'm Steve Runyon. I'm your Sunday associate this week. We do have some announcements. Actually, let me do the welcome first. It's welcome, then announcements. Welcome to the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, where we covenant to weave together the fabric of our community from the strands of our individual lives. We are an inclusive, welcoming congregation. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. We adhere to the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, which you can find on the newcomer card placed on the back of each chair in this sanctuary and at the welcome table in the Great Hall. Please feel free to take a card with you. This is a great time to silence any noise-making devices as we prepare for morning worship. And now, in the spirit of hospitality, I invite each of you to greet somebody you did not come with. We have a few announcements. Today at 1 here in this room, Beverly Hayes shares her Odyssey story. Snacks, unlike the 9:30 service, not snakes, snacks, are available following the second service. If you cannot be here in person, this week's email news and the fellowship's website have the Zoom link so you can enjoy Beverly's story online. On Saturday, October 15th at 2 p.m., we'll be together for Back in the Swing of Things concert, brought to you by our own Daryl and Mary Courtley. This 1-hour concert is inspired by the American Songbook. After the concert, we'll have a party to relax and be with new and old fellowship friends. We are providing rides for folks who need them. Today begins our children's Sunday morning religious education with a 6-week unit on environmental justice. For more info, go to muff.org/programs/children. If that applied to the earlier service. If you have any questions, please see our Director of Religious Education, Nick Walwork. Reverend Alan Wells is leading a class exploring enlightenment and mystical union. The world's religions and shamanism describe it, and the Buddha taught us how to awaken to it. Awakening or enlightenment is a potential for us all within Unitarian Universalism. How can personal awakening help us to transform our suffering world? Can we awaken in this lifetime? We'll look at the practices of Vajrayana, Zen, and Theravada Buddhism. Classes will be on 8 Tuesdays, beginning on October 5th from 7 to 9 p.m. There are many other adult programs offered this fall, Please check our website for all of them at muff.org/programs. And now we'll have some opening words from Joel.
So it seemed that the first Sunday I'm with you and offering sermons, that what better thing to talk about than interim ministry as we begin an interim ministry together. And, you know, transitions are transitions. They're changes. It's the process of change. It's the interim time. You're in between Reverend Allison and the next Reverend person or persons, whoever your search committee eventually brings and you vote to call. And we're in that in-between time. All congregations have an experience of in-between time. Each of us has those experiences too. Some of them are slow, like the pandemic, where we think it's over, but then it's not. We think it's over, but then it's not. We think it's over, but who knows, the crazy pandemic. One congregation I served was in Buffalo, New York, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Buffalo. And they had a very sudden transition one Sunday morning, one that we didn't quite expect. Now, the congregation in Buffalo, when I arrived, was still very formal. Beautiful stone walls, stained glass, big wooden arches, holding up a grand slate roof. I think the architectural term for its style was neo-Gothic. And actually, literally, it was done not just to be neo-Gothic, but because it looked like the church in Nottinghamshire, where the Pilgrims came from. And as a side note, the Pilgrims became Unitarian Universalists. First parish of Plymouth, Unitarian Universalist. But things were pretty formal when I arrived. I wore robes and a stole every Sunday, and there were ushers. Things were pretty formal. The ushers even wore white gloves. And when the nice ladies, older ladies came to church, I remember some of them would wear these little round pillbox hats, powder blue maybe, or light green. And it was pretty cool. Very friendly, very passionate about their Unitarian Universalism. In some ways reminded me a lot of this congregation, perhaps not in its worship style, but certainly in its passion for social justice and for the sense of friendship and community they had with one another. But it was kind of daunting, I think, to walk into such a formal experience on a Sunday morning. The guys with the white gloves. I mean, there was a guy there, Lee. He'd been the welcomer at the front door of the congregation for years, and he would meet people. He remembered their names. The next Sunday they'd come back, and so it felt welcoming once you connected with Lee. But one day there was a young man who came in. Lee was engaged with some visitors and didn't see him come in. This young man had lots of struggles in his life. And he was living on the streets, not in a home, not with a roof over his head most nights. And he came in kind of tentative because he couldn't find a seat. And he walked through the main doors and was walking down the aisle, kind of looking for a seat. And as he walked, he looked like he'd been sleeping out. I call it sleeping rough, I think, in like England. And, his hair wasn't brushed. He was missing some teeth. His clothes hadn't been washed in a while. And he's walking down the aisle, and people are stopping and looking at him like, is he going to sit next to me? And he's looking at them thinking, I'm watching this, and he's thinking, I just want to take a seat and not be intrusive. And I know they don't want me to sit next to them, but what am I going to do? And so he got up. He was about 3/4 of the way up front, and he realized the room had fallen silent. It didn't matter what I was saying at that point. Everybody was staring at the poor guy, and he felt so awkward. So he sat down, just like this, in the main aisle, the nave, as it's called in a formal congregation like that. Well, Lee had realized that things were getting quiet, and he'd looked up about halfway through this young man's journey, and he realized, how can I help this guy? And Lee started to come down the aisle, and the young man had sat down. Now, Lee was 84 years old, pretty formal guy, and he saw that young man sit down. And once the young man sat down, with purpose, Lee walked right up next to him and sat down next to him. So in the life of that congregation, there was the moment before the young man came in and the moment afterward. They thought they were learning how to be welcoming of a stranger. But what really drove the experience home for them, this was not a stranger. This young man had grown up in this congregation. And they realized in this moment, oh, this isn't somebody else. This is us. It wasn't long before they lost the white gloves, and not everybody got rid of the pillbox hat. I think maybe a year later we had a service with a rock and roll band, and let me tell you, watching the fine ladies in their cool pillbox hats rocking it out with the band, one of the coolest experiences of my life. Transitions come in unexpected ways. A young man walking down the aisle. Sometimes they're expected when a minister moves on to a new call. All kinds of ways that transitions come. I hope this morning, as we look at your transitions and our transitions, that we can offer you some spiritual gifts in the experience of change.
As we light our chalice, you'll find the words in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Now we'll join in our opening song, hymn 1000.
With joy and
In the 9:30 service, our director of religious education, Nick Wallwork, spoke about the chalice with the children. The chalice that we light here, he pointed out, and a children's chalice where they take the flame from the sanctuary, and it leads them as they take the spirit of community with them into their classes after the first 20 minutes of the service. And it was really fun to see the moment with, there must have been 30 kids. It was full up here. I was a little worried at first. I went and sat down there to make sure that it felt like there were kids. But I didn't need to be there. Milestones and passages. A congregation gathers because we are all experiencing some kind of transitions in our own lives, as well as the life of community and the world around us experiencing great transitions, even as we're gathered here in this moment. We recognize the transitions in a formal part of our celebration of life together. And we do so because perhaps we need to share the milestone with our beloved community, or perhaps we need our beloved community just to know that we're in transition, just with our quiet presence, or perhaps with a few cherished friends. We've shared the information, but need the ritual. It's a human need. It's not one based in reason. It's simply one based in the reason of heart, of our spirits. A significant milestone in the life of one of your members and of your ministry as a congregation is the ordination yesterday of Mandy Huizinga. Congratulations. It's an amazing thing when a congregation's ministry is so strong that one of your members finds a call to ministry out of their experience of congregational life. Congratulations to Reverend Mandy and to her ministry with her new congregation. There are many milestones here today, most of them shared in our present and the silence of our being together. Spirit of change, let us meditate together for a moment. What is it to enter transition? Change. Nobody really likes it, right? Sometimes I just don't want to deal with it. But then I come through the doors, those double doors, and even the doors before that, and always coming through doors. And maybe I came into this service for the first time, I don't know. I try not to leave myself behind at the door every morning I come. I want to cross the threshold into this place, go through the doors. I want to sing and share stories and poetry and ideas. And to do that, I know I have to listen if I truly want to hear. I have to look if I want to see. I have to be open. I have to be vulnerable if I want to love and to be loved. And aren't we meant to bring all that we are, crossing the threshold in this moment on the limit between one side of the door and the other? Bring it all, our joys and our sorrows, our beliefs and our disbeliefs, our confusion that we have both at the same time, our fears, all our dreams, all of it. Here we are among strangers and friends, new friends and old friends, some of us babies, some of us parents, some of us newlyweds, some of us newly singles. Youth are upstairs, elders are with us, longtime members, first-time visitors. And here we are at the common altar of our shared faith. It's not this place. There's a symbol of it, but that's not where it is. The altar is nothing more and nothing less than all we are. And how can we truly celebrate? If we set aside a part of ourselves, how do we not get caught in that motion from youth to adult, or from adult to elder, or from child to parent, if we set a part of ourselves aside? I know this because if I leave a part of myself at the door, the flow of time and life pulls me toward what is to come, and my attention at the past, I'm grabbing onto the door, I pull myself into the jam and knock myself into it, or maybe the door starts to close and my fingers get pinched. Time carries us on. I know this, to cross from where we have been in wonder to where we are now, we hope in love, and to where we will soon and someday be, may it be with compassion. We know this. We must find a way to bring all of us. So be it. Blessed be. Well, let's sing together. This is Building Bridges.
You get to sing around again. We'll sing it through twice, and then I'll split you number 1 and number 2, and it looks like you're well evenly divided. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to you, will you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to bridges between our divisions, I reach out our voices and reach out our visions. With friends we could make such sweet harmony. Building bridges between our divisions, I reach out to bridges between our divisions. I reach out our voices and reach out our visions. With friends we could make such sweet harmony. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony. Again. Friends, we could make such sweet harmony.
Salman Rushdie is a poet and writer, novelist, and recently, because of the way 30 years ago he wrote about Islam, wrote in a way that offended some cleric somewhere. The cleric issued a decree that Salman Rushdie should be assassinated, and actually just a couple of weeks ago somebody attempted to kill him in upstate New York. They didn't succeed, fortunately. I would say to the cleric, where the cleric bothered to listen to a Unitarian Universalist, you've insulted your faith. Islam is not so weak that it would be unable to endure the creative and curious investigation of a faith that supports the lives of millions. Perhaps, my friend cleric, you should go back and study your Quran a little more closely. This story is from a 12th century Sufi fairy tale. It was written by a Sufi mystic and poet. So Salman Rushdie retold this tale in an essay called Step Across the Line. He retold it in a way that I think we Unitarian Universalists can appreciate. Once upon a time, the birds all held a conference. The great bird god, the sea morg, had sent a messenger, the hoopoe bird, to summon all the birds to her legendary home, far away atop the mountain of Kaf. Not all the birds were very happy about this journey. It was a very long and dangerous journey for anyone. Some of the birds tried making excuses. Oh, I've got this thing I've got to do before I can go. You get started without me. Or I've got some urgent business. I'm not going to be able to go this time. I've got some friends. I just can't leave them behind. Only 30 birds agreed to make the dangerous journey to Kaf. They left home. They crossed over the border of their homeland, stepping across that line, and they came to understand this was a religious act, their adventures a sacred task, to go see the Simurgh. Love drove these 30 birds, the love of the holy, the love of Simurgh. On the road there were many dangers. There's a dreadful mountain with a huge ogre. They had to fight and overcome the ogre. Then there was a fire-breathing dragon they had to escape. So many dangers, and each of the dangers crying out to them, don't go any further, stop, go back. But the voyagers pushed on against their fear, and they were afraid. They defeated the ogre, they escaped the dragon, and they found the way up the mountain, the great mountain of Kaf. And so it was with these 30 birds that after overcoming their fears, enduring their trials, they reached the top of the mountain. They didn't see Simurgh anywhere. They were not happy, and they turned to the hoopoe bird. Where is Simurgh? Well, I thought you'd understand, said the hoopoe bird. In Farsi, Persian, Simurgh is a pun. It means sea, 30, and murg, birds, right? Simurgh held up a mirror. He said, you crossed the borders. You conquered your fears. You are yourselves what you have been looking for. You're Simurgh.
Now is the time for our offering. Today our offering will be split 50-50 between the Morristown UU Fellowship and Family Promise. Family Promise provides housing for families in significant life transitions through support from many religious organizations, including MUF. See the order of service for all the ways that you can give. And if you use Rome to give, do please be sure to select Sunday offering in the drop-down.
So you're in your interim time, the time usually understood as the time between what we Unitarian Universalists call settled ministers or called ministers. It's a transition, an interim time. It's why I'm called an interim minister. Unitarian Universalists have had interim ministers for over 40 years. Jewish congregations have interim rabbis. Baptists have interim pastors. Episcopalians have interim priests. There are interim imams. Nearly every religion in the United States has interim clergy that specialize in helping congregations with transitions. About 60 years ago, people who are religious leaders, clergy, came to understand that there are two important reasons to pay attention to what happens in transitional life for congregations or religious communities. First of all, it became very obvious that when the religious leader of a community departed, say a settled rabbi, the appointed priest, or the called minister, when they would leave, say in the way that Reverend Allison has left, the next clergy person would arrive, and they would last about 2 or 3 years, then there'd be a fight, and they'd have to go away in a cloud. They realized that especially after long, successful ministry, or sometimes there are ministries that end with difficulties, or sometimes a minister, something happens to the minister, perhaps a serious health issue, and they have to leave, and that has an effect on a congregation. And there's a transition. There's a time for transition that has to happen. There's going to be an interim after that departure of a settled minister. So the question is it going to be an intentional interim or an unintentional interim? And the second reason, because what happens during an intentional interim is a congregation comes to understand itself in new ways. There's a unique opportunity in an interim time, in a transitional time of change. And when your interim ministry is intentional, there's somebody who comes in, someone like myself, and we see ourselves as permanent outsiders. And what we hope to do is listen to you with new ears, and see you with new eyes, and love you with new hearts. Who are you? Who have you been? Who are you becoming? And we know that when I remain that outsider, that somehow supports the changes that you can and perhaps want to make. Or even if you don't want to make them, you'll find it's worth it anyway. They can be very annoying, those changes. It's important to know that I cannot be considered as your next settled minister. I'm here for 2 years, and then I have to go. There's a reason for that, because should I become a minister that's a candidate for your long-term ministry, all of that change stops. All of the possibilities of discovering more about who you are won't happen. So I am, by my own understanding, pre-fired. And there's great opportunity in that for you. And that's why I love what I do. I come as an opportunity, asking you questions, listening to you, helping you listen well to each other. And it's a privilege to be the interim minister of the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. It's amazing what our congregations can do. And congregations are just, in some ways, just like us. Congregations each have their own personalities, their own spiritual styles, spiritual lives. But because congregations are larger beings, the time it takes for transitions is a bit slower than it is for us as individuals. And it's important to know that as that change happens, I come deeply believing not just in the inherent worth and dignity of all people, but in all beings. And as an interim, I believe in the inherent worth and dignity of congregations. I attended the first of many interim minister trainings about 12 years ago, I think. And at that first training I took, I've taken many since then, either because I took a staff to a training or the most recent one, I was trying to develop new skills in anti-oppression and anti-racism. And that first time, though, I was at the training, and we'd broken into a small group, and the leader of my group, an experienced interim minister, was telling us the story of 30 Birds by Salman Rushdie, and my hearing's not the greatest, so I kept hearing, here we were outside next to a busy street, I kept hearing this leader of our small group saying, "Dirty birds." I thought, well, this is interesting. I want to hear more of this story. Does this involve like bird baths or something? What's on the... Dirty birds, I said. We haven't talked about the dirt part yet. And everybody laughed and said, no, 30 birds, 30. Oh, we laughed. And then I asked a typical interim question. Can we go inside? So that story retold by Salman Rushdie from a 12th century story of a poet ends with a pun, one we weren't able to hear, not being speakers of Farsi, or Persian, sometimes called by Westerners. Simurg means both bird god and 30 birds. But this story even has its own story. In the original telling, the poet told the story with the hoopoe bird being a wise Sufi storyteller, returning his people to the simple truth that God was among them all along, and the truth was there just to be seen. Salman Rushdie retold the story 30 years ago, but he told it in a way that would be familiar to us as Unitarian Universalists. The hoopoe bird is not, in Rushdie's telling, a conduit to a single truth. The hoopoe bird is a social networker, a storyteller. And the birds, like a community of people, find their own way to journey from past to future. In experiencing the transitions of their existence, they create their own story. They become together their own narrative and learn to shape it as they journey through it. So you've had a lot of transition lately. Reverend Allison is now the lead minister in Portland, Oregon. Your music director, Stearns Matthews, has moved away for his family, and we have an interim music director now. Thank you, Beth Wilson, for stepping up for a month or two. You know, you're getting very close to the amazing finish of a capital campaign project you've been working on for a long time, and it must feel like a long time to y'all. And if you don't know about it, this congregation has, for I think 8 years, got started raising money. There's this amazing, I love that parking lot. Nice, it looks great. The new roof in the process of being put on now. And maybe an addition coming up here. Your amazing generosity, your remarkable patience through a fairly long journey, winding a lot of different ways. That's a lot of transition to have to go through for a long time. But then, I guess that may have prepared you pretty well for the pandemic, because we keep thinking it's over and it's not. Stupid pandemic. You have, as a congregation, shown such a remarkable presence through a lot of transition. And you've thrived through other big transitions since you were founded in 1955. And I think your spiritual ancestors gathered a lot of wisdom as they went through them. and have shared it now with the world at large. You have a great ministry. You know, I remember it was 22 years ago, I think, you put your first website up, and a lot of other congregations were checking out your website because it looked really good at the time. It was a great website. And you know, I was just last night, I got sent a history of the congregation, and I was just glancing at it, but one of the most remarkable things about it, I'm curious. It looks to me like you've been working on multiculturalism for more than your 60 years, maybe since the beginning. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you better, to learning more about who you are and what your dreams are together for what's ahead. Many crossover moments. But you know, one of the things I learned from Buddhism is that every moment is a transitional moment. Every moment is a crossover moment. We're always at the threshold between past and future. Some of them are small. The moment between that breath I took and the exhalation I just let out. Or maybe bigger threshold moments. Maybe a child has been born, or we've been married, or a marriage has ended, or maybe the way our bodies have worked has changed very suddenly, or maybe we've heard a story from a wise elder, and we're learning how to live our lives in a more beautiful, caring way. Many of the cultures and religions of the world offer a lot of wisdom about how to engage transitions. And as I said, it's not about the logic of it, it's just about the logic of our hearts or our souls. There's an old Irish spiritual tradition known as the welcome of the door. A writer described how the welcome of the door happened just inside the doorway of an Irish home. And that ground right there, just at the door, was holy ground. She writes, upon entering, a visitor would stand there and say a blessing for the household. And it was said there because the doorway and the linen, that piece of metal or a piece of wood or stone, typically in an Irish home, that linen was the place, that holy ground that was in between worlds, the outside, the inside, home and the world beyond. And because this place was neither here nor there, there was a crack between the worlds. And power emanated from the spiritual world, from the world of the spirits, in a place like this. What better place to say a blessing? In the Jewish tradition, next week begins a new year. And during the first 10 days of that year, the gates of heaven are said to be open. Our prayers are heard in ways that they are not the rest of the year. We can rewrite the future by making amends for harms we have caused and for seeking forgiveness in a process that ends on Yom Kippur. The ancient Romans had a ritual. They would tell of their two-faced god Janus, the god of beginnings and endings, a head with one face on this side, which was a young-faced god, the other face looking to the past, an old god looking toward what was. Our month of January takes its name from the god Janus. So you are used to being on thresholds for a while. And now you and I will look to make these threshold moments an opportunity for you. Ask good questions. See what's amazing and strong about the congregation and build on that. It's a place, even in science, we know is important. Have you ever noticed that the places of greatest diversity are those places where different ecosystems come together, where land and water meet. The biodiversity is greater than anywhere else, like where a forest and a prairie meet, such diversity at that border, at that connecting place. Along the banks of a river, even the surface of the earth itself. Another writer, Thomas More, believes in the importance of rituals for us to understand what it is to be in transition and to make the transitions. He describes his favorite transitional places as a piano, a Gothic cathedral, dessert, a forest path, an Irish pub, and a candlelit bathtub. And in my experience, a service like this, we gather every Sunday. This is a transitional moment we intentionally experience with one another every week. We transition from the busyness of life, the work we do as individuals, the connections we have as individuals, and we become something more than we are. Not to leave a part of ourselves behind, but to emerge as something more. We celebrate milestones. The difference between the life that was and the life that is now and will be. We create interesting doorways, like the kind of doorways that there are between theists and atheists who worship together in a meeting room like this. That's pretty cool, I think. Doorways between joys and sorrows. We're practicing life and taking that practice with us back out into the world with a way of making transitions in love and compassion. We do rituals, we tell tales. Many religions have myths. They're all metaphors. I first encountered that term metaphor in high school. I was learning about poetry. And we talked about metaphors as a way of creating a doorway between one way of understanding of the world and another way of understanding the world. And the word itself, metaphor, is a great metaphor for what we're doing. The ancient Greek word comes from two Greek roots, pherein, which means to carry, and meta, which means beside or across. So a metaphor is itself like a door of meaning, carrying meaning across from one realm of experience to another. Or perhaps even carrying meaning between one religious experience and another. I want to leave you with a story. It's a story that Kathleen Norris tells. She's a poet and a writer, and she described in her autobiography her many years of standing at the threshold of becoming a poet. It was many years. She'd led a sheltered life as a child and teenager in Hawaii, with books, with poetry, the comforts of family and close friends. Norris wanted to become a poet and a writer, and she chose the college she went to in Bennington, Vermont, because its undergraduate school students were all women. Apparently she was not looking for anything to distract her from her purpose. She planned to immerse herself in her studies, but she didn't quite realize at the age of 17 that living in a dorm thousands of miles away from her parents, she was going to have to develop a life of her own. She got to school, and she writes about what had happened. I felt that I had died. I considered other people dense for not recognizing this. They treated me as if I was still alive. One morning, in great distress, I rang the doorbell of the campus apartment of the admissions director. She found me on her doorstep, blubbering with tears. She was surprised that a young woman who had confidently quoted Emily Dickinson, Soren Kierkegaard, and Albert Camus in her application essay was just a lonely, homesick adolescent. She invited me in for breakfast. I couldn't eat. She listened well, and then she kindly advised me that the decision over whether or not to remain at school was one I might make on a trial basis every morning. Can I stay here one more day? Probably. Most likely. And that became the mantra that got me through the next few months. She developed a great skill at living in this transitional this threshold experience. She stayed there a long time, as it turned out, perhaps too long. She experienced the transition between one stage of life and another for a long time. She went to New York City. She went to work in the publishing business, but didn't quite become the poet and writer she was intending to be. It started out as a painful experience, but then it became perhaps a little too comfortable. And then her grandmother died. And she writes about returning to live in the town in South Dakota where her grandmother's home was after her grandmother had died. Her grandmother had left her the house, and she went there, but not to visit as she did as a child, but returned there to live. She still found herself in a perpetual threshold experience, but it shifted in an essential way. That shift began one day when she visited her grandmother's church. She wasn't prepared, she writes, for the pain she experienced in the visit. The services, she writes, felt like word bombardment, agony for a poet. I was so exhausted afterward, I'd have to sleep for 3 or more hours. Doctrinal language slammed so many doors. I became frustrated when I couldn't find the words behind words. Sometimes I just had to give up. I just decided I wasn't religious. A pastor friend I'd made in town said to me, "You know, Kathleen, I don't know too many people who are so serious about religion they can't go to church." But that was the thing. Norris found the power and ultimately the peace that came with crossing over from one place in life to another. And it was because of community. The gift of community. This community, a small one, where poets and ministers have to hang out together. We raid each other's libraries. We sustain decent arguments across time on matters of science, politics, and religion. And this is finally the community from which Norris can cross the threshold. And she became a writer and a poet. May this time we have together, this interim time, be a time when you find yourselves stepping into the next chapter as a people in the story that is the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. You will gather here each week, not just to keep the doors of a building open, but to keep the doors open that between our lives, our loves, and our hopes. Together, let us continue to find that courage that keeps us journeying together through all of life's changes, and to keep practicing life on that threshold between this moment and the next. I'm excited to see where it is you might be going. And I'm so grateful to be your interim minister as we begin this journey together now into that next chapter.
Thank you.
So I love this particular song we're going to sing. It's called Let It Be a Dance. Rick Maston was this delightful, just sparkly person. I adored Rick. I see you nodding your head. And I did not know Rick Maston, but I knew his mom because she taught me in Sunday school, and she was delightful and sparkly too. It's just such a. So I just when I learned about this song, and actually one of the members here knew Rick well enough that he knew him when he was writing the song. So I was really just. I love all these connections we have. So. Beth was telling me that this is a tango, and usually tangos kind of go slower. Why don't we try it? Maybe it doesn't have to be as fast as I was thinking. I think they can do it slower. Sometimes we don't want it to get dirgy-like, let it be a dance. You kind of have to move, I think, right? Let it be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Oh, you're doing it. Okay, let's sing. I invite you to stand in body or spirit. Be a dance we do. May I have this dance with you. Through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Gathering, know that take this light, this dancing light I see you in you, as you have for so many years. Take it to a world that needs the light of love, the light of compassion, the light of connection. Take it, and with the light goes out, remember, we'll be here. We'll be here again on Sunday. We'll be here, the doors open, our hearts ready to meet. Go in peace, be in peace. See you next week.